Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Diane Smith-Gander, National Chairman of CEDA. Welcome to our first live stream event of 2021, The Workplace of the Future. It's an apt way to start the year. We're all looking ahead to the new normal at work with the much anticipated COVID-19 vaccine rollout, which is due to start in months ahead. Let me begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands which we all live and work on. I'm hosting this event from Wajak Noongar Budja. I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. As you all know, we marked Australia Day earlier this week. As a nation, we really must find a way to resolve the debate around the date and the context of this national holiday. It's an important step towards effective reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. And I, for one, am actually for changing that date. I'm really delighted that our speaker today is Telstra's Chief Executive, Andy Penn, one of Australia's most recognisable and most respected business executives. To make the most of your attendance today, you can join the conversation by following CEDA on Twitter at CEDA_news and tweeting highlights of the discussion using the hashtag #FutureOfWork. Post your questions to Andy via the Pigeonhole app. You can also vote on questions that are asked by others. We'll ask as many of your questions as possible, but voting allows us to see which of the questions have the broadest interest. To access Pigeonhole, enter ceda.pigeonhole.at on your phone's browser and enter the passcode FUTURE, all in caps. Please also cast your vote on today's poll question in the Pigeonhole app. The question is, what do you consider to be the most important enabler to driving workforce flexibility, employee engagement and productivity? And I'll share the results at the end of the event. Now, Andy Penn has been Chief Executive of Telstra for 5 years. Before joining Telstra, his career spanned 40 years across telecommunications, financial services and shipping. At Telstra, Andy is driving a major transformation to position the company to compete in the 5G world at a time of enormous technological change in telecommunications. Like many of us, Andy has learnt a lot about how to reimagine the workplace over the last 12 months. Today, he's going to share his insights on the workplace of the future and the crucial role Telstra has to play as Australia's biggest telecommunications company as we enter the second year of the COVID-19 pandemic. Andy will also explode some of the myths we've probably all heard about agile working. I found that very interesting when we were getting our briefing together. And I think these themes really dovetail very nicely with the key focus of CEDA events this year: workforce and workplace, jobs, agility and transformation. Also this year, CEDA's research team is looking at business dynamism and productivity, competitiveness. This also fits in very neatly with the themes of Andy's presentation. We've had more than 1,000 registrations for today's discussion, even though I suspect some of you are still firmly in holiday mode. The questions have already been flowing in and some really fantastic common themes are emerging. So there's clearly a really strong appetite for this topic. So without any further ado, over to you, Andy.
Thanks very much, Diane. And can I join you in acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm joining you on today, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today. Thank you also to CEDA for putting on this event. It's really exciting to be here. I hope everyone has also had the chance to have a relaxing and recuperative break over the holiday season. Like me, I'm sure many of you use this as a time to reflect on what the last 12 months has meant and to think about what the future might hold. Now, I know many of us saw the Christmas break in particular as the finishing line for 2020 and a chance to put the year behind us in the hope that in 2021 things would be a little easier or maybe at least a little clearer. Unfortunately, I think the reality is there is every chance that 2021 will be even more uncertain than 2020. The facts are, we still don't know how this pandemic will evolve, what difference the vaccine will make, and when we'll be able to travel again and to where, or when we'll be able to get back to the office on a consistent basis. On a personal level and on so many different fronts, I've never felt less certain or less clear about which direction our world will take from here. And I know that I'm not alone in this. And because of this uncertainty, there seems to be a strong desire for things to return to normal. I think as humans, we like structure in our lives. We crave routine. It makes us feel safe. It's natural, therefore, for us to wish for the world around us to feel normal. But I think that this is the wrong thinking, as it will never return to normal. How we work, how we travel, and how we live generally will not look the same again as it did 12 months ago. It is therefore better that we spend our energy in accepting these changes that need to come and embrace a new way of living and a new way of working. As leaders, we need to provide and find ways to provide clarity and confidence amongst the noise of these uncertain times. Most importantly, as leaders, though, we also need to see the opportunities in 2021 that stem from the disruption of 2020. We need to do things differently, show up differently as companies and as a country. Now, I'm an optimist by nature, and I never underestimate the ingenuity and creativity of humans to adapt. There are many examples through history where bold decisions made in the wake of a crisis fundamentally changed trajectory. We all know the story of Singapore, which prior to the Second World War was a tiny economy, whilst the Philippines was the biggest in Southeast Asia. What Singapore did after the war, though, was to plan longer term, and despite little land and no natural resources, but with bold thinking, transformed itself into a major manufacturing and financial powerhouse and one of the world's most prosperous nations. Here in Australia, we've seen many smaller examples, particularly in hospitality, which was devastated by the necessary restrictions in Victoria last year. One of Melbourne's most well-known restaurants was doing more than 1,000 covers on a Saturday night in the peak of the lockdown, whilst the curfews were in place, through the rapid launch of a providor service. Amazingly, this was more than twice the number of covers able to do pre-COVID and at a higher average revenue per customer. As in any crisis, the winners, of course, though, therefore, will be those that make the right decisions in these moments of inflection and change. That is true for countries, that is true for political movements, that is true for companies, and it's true for all of us as individuals as well. So let's not strive to return to normal. Let's do the opposite and use this as an opportunity to fundamentally change how we live and how we work. Let's just not accept a world where we need to live with COVID. We can do better than that. Let's take control of the situation and use it to our advantage to enhance the quality of life for our people, our customers, and our communities. And that is what I wanted to talk about today, our future ways of working and the technology that is needed to underpin it. So how will we work in the future? I believe there are 4 elements to this. Firstly, flexibility for our people. Before COVID, when we spoke about workplace flexibility, we were really talking about where we work. However, increasingly, flexibility will also become about all elements of work, such as when we work and how we work. Ultimately, we need to be less concerned about where our people are, their time on the job, and how they're doing their work. What really matters is when and how they are most effective. What delivers the best outcome for our customers and for our businesses. This means there's a much stronger need to better understand the human dynamic of our people, to build knowledge of their lifestyles and how they prefer to work, and to build this into the experience that we offer our employees. The same goes for our customers, of course. We also need to help our employees with the tools and resources to be adaptable to work within the context of changing restrictions and limitations. There is no point trying to second guess or forecast what restrictions will be in place and when they will change. I trust others better informed than me to make those decisions. It's the paradox that defines our times. Our strategic decisions need to be based on the long term, but our decisions about how and where we work need to be made in the moment, but built around flexibility and adaptability. The second element to our future ways of working relates to agility and speed. Even before COVID, digital disruption was forcing many organisations to manage change and make decisions more quickly than ever before. COVID only intensified that, with companies under pressure to make their business models fit the changing requirements. The need for speed is only going to increase as the forces of digitisation, globalisation and automation continue to accelerate. To respond to this, at Telstra, we've moved 11,000 people over the last 2 years to work in agile teams. We'd already done a lot of the hard yards pre-COVID, and we will be fully agile by the end of this year. Now, agile is one of those concepts where everybody knows knowingly when you mention it, but I'm not sure that its power is yet really fully understood. The simplest way for me to articulate agile is that historically, organisations will run and would organise their work vertically through traditional functions: sales and marketing, operations, product development, systems and IT. In agile, you completely turn the company on its side and you focus on what you need to deliver in the next 3 months. What products are we launching? What assets are we building? What services are we delivering to our customers? And then you organise your resources, your work and planning and accounting around that, not around the functions. It forces you to regularly review and, where necessary, change your priorities in response to the market and to customer dynamics. And importantly, it also forces you to more directly align your resources behind your priorities. This is not something that actually happens easily in the old functional model where fiefdoms and silos can dominate, particularly in large, complex companies. The third element of changing our ways of working is how to foster innovation and creativity in a virtual environment. During COVID, a lot of leaders deprioritised innovation as they focused on business continuity, productivity, and importantly, health and safety measures. On the other hand, there were many examples where the crisis has provoked innovation and creativity and shown that businesses can adapt quickly and creatively when they need to. It's the one area, however, where it is harder to gauge what the impact of working from home has been, but it is crucially important that we re-establish and even increase our focus on innovation and creativity if we are to capitalise on this moment. So how do we do that when we're working virtually? Now, I hear a lot that a virtual meeting cannot replace face-to-face. Well, maybe that's true, but I would say that not all virtual meetings are the same. The quality of the technology you are using, the functionality of the tools, the reliability of the connection, how well you manage the meeting to engage everybody, all play a major role in the quality of the outcome. And we have seen a rapid increase in the innovation in collaboration tools over a very short period of time. So there's some cool stuff out there. We need to support our people with access to the very best of these tools when and where they need them, and arm them with the skills to get the most from them. This means we need to think about how we train, coach and mentor today's job market entrants in a much more virtual world. We've proven over the last 12 months that we don't need to be working in the office together to innovate. So let's build on that experience and challenge ourselves further. The final element about our future ways of working I wanted to comment on today is how do we build more humanity into our culture? Through working from home, COVID has provided a window into our personal lives. In many ways, this has been positive. It's shown leaders in a more vulnerable setting as they wrestle with many of the same challenges of working from home that everybody else does. It has been a great leveller, and that helps build empathy and intimacy. However, it has also been a profound challenge for many people, and we have all been mentally affected to some degree. As leaders, we need to deepen our understanding of the challenges of working from home in situations such as shared households, to consider how the workplace layout give our people space to work, which isn't their bedside table, as happened with one of our people recently when he found his flatmate was hogging the kitchen bench. As leaders, we need to understand the parenting and educating burden still too often falls to women. And so how do we support them with the flexibility they need to work and juggle their work and home lives? We cannot afford to go backwards on female representation or gender pay. In fact, we should be using this as an opportunity to make great leaps forward in diversity, and in the workforce. Because the bottom line is competition for talent is going to shift in the new era of remote and hybrid work, because where an employee lives is no longer a limitation. Our future ways of working are going to be instrumental in how successful we will be in this war for talent. The companies that get it right will attract and keep the best talent. And of course, talent is the single most important competitive differentiator, particularly in these uncertain times. For Telstra, we're proud of the work that we've done in setting ourselves up to capitalise on this moment. We embraced flexible working almost a decade ago, and our agile adoption is well ahead of the curve. As a major employer, we are already moving to a location agnostic approach for all office and contact centre based roles, opening up the talent pool beyond the typical CBD with a hybrid of digital and physical tools and spaces tailored to the specific roles in the company, preferences and needs. For example, we now have 80% of our contact centre consultants in Australia choosing to work from home on any given day. 100% are enabled to do so if they wish. And as I have previously announced, we will have all consumer and small business inbound customer calls answered in Australia within the next 18 months. In fact, one of the things that people were surprised by during the challenges of the last 12 months was actually just how seamlessly many of us were able to move to work from home, how we were able to support that with the necessary bandwidth, and how quickly people did adopt digital ways of working and living. In fact, on a global scale, some estimates are that we vaulted 5 years in terms of digital adoption in literally a matter of just a few months. Now, none of that happened, of course, by accident. In our case, it happened because in 2016, we knew we could see a further acceleration in technology, and we took the decision to invest $3 billion to build the networks of the future and to completely rebuild our digital environment. In 2018, we launched our strategy, which we call T22, to simplify and further digitise the business. And those investments have transformed Telstra. Our digital sales, which accounted for 6% of sales in 2018, are on track to be 35% this year. Where people used to queue up outside the stores when a new iPhone was launched, 50% of orders in the last iPhone launch were through an online app. Service appointments tell the same story. 39% in 2018 and on track for more than 70% in 2021. There are more changes that we need to make. We need to extend our direct debit to solve a whole host of billing issues for customers. And I know some of those changes will cause challenges, so we're thinking carefully about how we can cushion any impacts. New ways of working and technology-driven change is only going to accelerate from here, and that has broader implications. Like me, I'm sure you would have seen stories of houses in regional areas being snapped up. Anecdotally, of course, what that says is that there's a profound shift potentially underway as people have come to understand they can work from anywhere and the regions are attractive. That raises a whole raft of questions about infrastructure and important policy decisions for government. Questions such as, what about our CBDs? Whether maybe they're going to become more about where people come to be entertained, to watch sport, eat, drink and socialise, and more organisations convene their people to collaborate. Questions around some of the huge current infrastructure or investment projects which are already in flight or in the process of being approved at exactly a time when people are actually thinking of working from home on an ongoing basis or considering moving to the regions. Questions about the regions themselves, where infrastructure spending is needed to support a shifting population with transport, housing, education, hospitals, as well as, of course, telecommunications. And questions about the role of different technologies that will enable all of this, including IoT, AI, big data, the NBN and 5G. In fact, 5G is going to play a huge role in enabling flexibility. At Telstra, we saw early that 5G was a game-changing technology, which is why we were first to market in 5G while others were still debating the business case. That's why we now have more than 50% population coverage, and today more than 75% of all the handsets that we sell are 5G handsets. 5G has the capacity to have 10 times the speed of 4G. And as the world of the Internet of Things expands and where everything that can be connected will be connected, 5G is the wireless technology of the future that's going to enable it. 2021 is an inflection point for Telstra as the change that we have been making as part of our T22 strategy gain momentum. We're migrating customers into a new technology environment at scale. We need to complete a restructure of the business. We need to further extend our 5G population coverage, which will be 75% by June. We need to continue to fundamentally change how we operate, and we need to complete job reductions that we put on hold during COVID. We've also reached the end of the rollout of the NBN, which means some of our headline results still carry the weight of the past, whilst our underlying performance is starting to reap the benefits from the investments and the changes that we have made, including cost out, leadership in 5G, and simplification of our consumer and small business plans. We said at our Investor Day in November that we expect 2021 underlying EBITDA to be weighted to the second half of the year, and that's certainly how the outlook looks. No doubt there will be plenty of headlines, but as we continue to transform, the underlying trend for Telstra is good. Let me conclude. At the end of 2020, it was clear Australians wanted to do business differently, to work differently, to live differently. The biggest risk we face as leaders is believing we will snap back to how they were. They will not, and in many ways they should not. This is the time of unprecedented disruption, and we must respond with unprecedented action. We need to be bold, not to squander the opportunity to think differently, to not just recover, but recover stronger by building more resilient, more digital, more future-ready organisations. I said at the outset, leadership is about providing clarity and confidence of direction, and that is most challenging in times of profound uncertainty. But leadership is also about seeing and seizing the opportunities ahead of us. I think we have a historic opportunity right now to renew, revitalise and reimagine business fit for purpose in a new digital age. It's a moment we must not waste. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy. There is just so much in that presentation. I'm actually not quite sure where to start asking questions. So do give me a hand on the pigeonhole. There's already questions coming in on the pigeonhole that are exactly the things I wanted to ask you, because sometimes when you're in the privileged position of being the person that's asking the questions, you go down the areas you're interested in and then think, oh, hang on a tick, I hope that's aligned with my audience. But in this case, it definitely is. I'd like to start with a personal question, if you don't mind. And of course, you opened the door on this by being so clear at the beginning what a time of uncertainty and challenge it's been for you personally. And so I think, therefore, I can ask this question. But tell us a little bit about, what was your personal experience like during COVID? And if you want to tell us about that restaurant that did the 1,000 covers, I suspect you were one of the happy users of their service. We'd be happy to know the name.
No, well, look, thanks very much, Diane. I mean, I think the first thing I would say is that, at Telstra, we're often dealing with crisis situations because that's partly the nature of the business. So whether it's a bushfire or a cyclone or a flood or some other type of event which impacts communications or where communications plays a role. And so we set up a crisis team. And so we're quite well used to that rhythm of things. And of course, this time last year, we were deep in that with the impact of the bushfires. What was interesting with COVID is the first thing I would say, it was the first crisis I've been involved in that was affecting me personally at the side a professional responsibility to respond, and that was an interesting dynamic. And of course, that goes the same for everybody. And like many people, I've got family that I've not been able to see. I've had family that have been affected by COVID. My sister-in-law had a difficult time with COVID in the US. My mother's had COVID earlier in the year, and she's unfortunately not well, and she's in the UK, and so I can't see her. So there's all of these personal issues that you're dealing with. I've got 4 children, one of which lost her job 2 times during COVID. Thankfully, she got it back again. But that's just imagine the sort of the trauma that has on the younger population and in the early stages of their careers, and how long that affects them going forward into the future. And I think, like all of us, we just looked. My wife and I just looked for ways to try and create moments and things that we could do that that helped it maybe mitigate the impact of some of the emotional stress and the other pressures. So getting a profitable service was a very good example of that. And it was through that I learned that, this was a very successful service. And how cool, because that particular restaurant was, as I say, it was ending up doing more business during COVID whilst we had curfews than it actually was pre-COVID, which was a pretty amazing pivot, as they say. So, and I think it just points to, when we're put into a crisis, it does force us to innovate creatively and quickly. And I think that's an opportunity going forward as well.
Thanks. Look, I think the points that you made around not accepting this as the new normal, but actively shaping what the new normal is, were very important as well. And it's engendered a lot of follow-on questions from our audience. CEDA members have been telling us for a long time they really are interested in insights from others around this. And I think your explanation of how personal experiences can then play out into the decision making of an executive of such a large organisation is really quite an important insight, because often I think leaders have felt they need to hide that piece rather than make it very clear. As you pointed out, people are now coming into our living rooms. But you've got this very large workforce, it's distributed. You talked about the changes you're going. So I'm interested in how you actually feel you get the pulse. And we had a question from Tiffany who said, how do we keep the benefits? I'm reading it from my screen, guys, which is why I'm turning. How do we retain the benefits of human connection, incidental interactions, broader team business connections in this new hyper-flexible remote working environment? So be interested in how you, as a leader of a large distributed organisation, feel you're able to do that.
Yeah, no, look, thanks, Diane. I mean, the first thing I would say that I had a bit of a sort of, I suppose, an epiphany or a realisation over the holiday season break, because as I mentioned in my comments, we all sort of got to the end of 2020 thinking it was the finishing line, and we're glad to see the back of that year, and it's all going to be different in 2021. And of course, that's not necessarily the case. And so the other dynamic for me was that I've been sort of, if you like, searching and thinking about this glide path back to normal. So, I'll go back to work one day a week next week, and then maybe 2 days a week the week after, and it will gradually get back to normal. I just don't think that's going to happen. And I think we have to be far more spontaneous and flexible and accepting around the uncertainty that we're facing, and the fact that we may have restrictions this week and we may not have them next week, and vice versa, and just learn to be able to deal with that with less emotional impact. I think that's the first thing I would say that's important. And I think that given that, and in the context of that, that's where we need to be innovative and creative about how we maintain those connections that Tiffany's talking about. Because, as I said, we may all believe that a face-to-face meeting is better than a virtual meeting. Well, maybe it is, but if we're not able to have one, then rather than sit there sort of bemoaning the fact, we should be thinking creatively about how do we connect with each other in the world in which we're living today. And there are multiple different ways to do that. And I've seen so many sort of creative and innovative things that people are doing, and technology is playing a critically important role. I've often thought, actually, if COVID had struck 10 years ago, what the world would have looked like and how we would have coped. And we certainly wouldn't have been able to cope in anywhere like the way we have. And the difference has been the technology and the connectivity that's been made available to enable us to connect virtually. And I think there's been so much more innovation in that space, literally in the last 12 months, with the tools that have become available. And I think people are incredibly creative and incredibly innovative. I think part of the dynamic is we need to move on from we're going back to normal and pour our energy into being creative in this new context.
Yeah. This is a question that's coming through very clearly in the feed. The famous Anonymous is being very active today. And Anonymous is really interested to explore some of these creative ideas that you've seen in other places. So have you got some examples that can help bring to life, how this innovation and creativity can be fostered in a virtual environment?
Well, I'm on the board of the National Gallery of Victoria, and one of my great passions is the visual arts. And so here's an organisation that's obviously profoundly, in fact, impacted by by the restrictions necessary as a consequence of COVID, because people think about a gallery as somewhere you go to look at art and to experience art. The NGV did an amazing job of putting all sorts of digital resources online during the COVID restrictions, and they've had an enormous level of engagement. In fact, I think some of the researchers sort of said that it's been the most engaged gallery globally, and both in terms of enabling people to engage with art, but actually then developed a whole range of educational courses so that people could study more about art and learn more about art. And then, of course, groups where they could share ideas. And then that's all been topped off with this amazing show, which has been made available physically, but also virtually, called the Triennial, which is on show now in Victoria, which was launched at the end of 2020, the end of last year. And they've installed some incredibly creative and in many ways technologically developed installation art in the traditional National Gallery of Victoria, and as I say, made that available virtually as well. And an organisation, I think, many of us obviously are in businesses, and but if you think about many of the organisations that are in the not-for-profit space and or arts types of organisations or sports organisations, their revenue comes from attendance predominantly. And so if attendance isn't there, then they have got to be incredibly creative about how they respond. I think the AFL did a great job and the NRL did a great job at really trying to keep fans engaged and actually sport happening, because not only is that good for the culture and the psyche of the country, it's actually good for all of the people that work within it as well. So I think you don't need to look at just business to find many of those examples.
That whole attendance dynamic is a really interesting thing. I'm glad you introduced that word, because Anonymous has got some questions about what happens when work doesn't involve as much attendance. So the question is, if we move from monitoring hours to outputs, what does that do in your workplace? And I'm wondering if you've had any movement already within Telstra towards that, because this seems to be really quite an important theme, that people are trying to understand how you manage this agile hybrid workplace. What are the indicators that you can use? So you've already moved a lot of this way in Telstra. Perhaps you've got some lessons that you could share.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of sort of elements to this. There's agile ways of working itself, which is really a methodology, and I touched on a little bit in my remarks about how best way to think about it is you sort of turn the organisation on its side and you focus your energy through the things that you need to deliver as opposed to the roles and the functions in the company. And then, of course, the other dynamic is working from home or working from the office or working virtually. And it, for us, 2020 was all about bringing those two things together, because we were working in Agile pre-COVID. And in fact, a lot of the early Agile work and methodology spoke to stand-ups and collaborative meetings. And if anything, probably emphasised meeting in person a little bit more than ordinary sort of functional working. And of course, as COVID has had these very significant impacts on workforce restrictions, that's really sort of created a bit of a challenge between how you implement Agile. So that's then forced us to be incredibly creative about how we basically do adopt Agile in a virtual. And again, it comes back to a lot of the tools that we've been building that actually enable our people to engage and work virtually, but using that Agile methodology. And the point about Agile is it's really, as I say, it's focusing your resources and measuring what you're delivering to your customers. I mean, it sounds an obvious point, but particularly in large organisations, and you'd know this, Diane, from your own experience, sometimes the priorities that you agreed that you're going to set as a company are not necessarily fully supported when the functions are operating like this, because there's lots of little sort of turf battles or things you've got to work through. Whereas if you actually align yourself this way and you make your resource allocation decisions this way, then it basically just eliminates that. And so and in fact, our functional heads, which we still have, we have then chapter leads, and it's the chapter leads that actually allocate the resources, not the functional heads. And so they don't even have the power to do that. And that's been pretty profound.
So you knew there'd be a question at some point about the NBN. And I've been trying to work out where is the best way to put Anonymous's question about the NBN into this conversation. So I figure let's just deal with it here and now, get it over and done with, and then we can move to talking about some of the other questions that continue to focus on this agile and workplace of the future. But of course, how good our connectivity is at home really does facilitate this workplace of the future. So with 5G, do we actually need the NBN, or is the NBN a thing of the past?
So there's lots of technology that ultimately come together to make sure that we're all connected. NBN is a big one. That's basically NBN looks after all of your fixed broadband needs at home. 5G is another one because 5G is obviously providing mobile coverage. Satellite plays a role. Other technologies play a role as well. The bottom line is we need all of them to be successful in the future, because if you think about the reality of the world where the data demand is only continuing to grow and our need for connectivity is continuing to grow, we need all of these technologies to work together to be successful. 5G is really exciting because the thing about 5G is that it's the next wave of mobile technology, which is even faster and has more bandwidth than 4G. But you could not take all of the data that's going over the NBN and put it on the 5G networks. It doesn't have that much capacity. So that's why they need to work together. The difference with 5G, of course, as well, is it's also wireless. And so in the world of what we call the Internet of Things, where you can sort of connect lots of things or put sensors in lots of things, you need to be able to do that wirelessly. You can't put wires to sensors in wheelie bins and self-driving cars and all of those other things you want to automate. And so the mobile network gives you the ability to connect. We need them all. And actually, in many respects, they're interrelated and they're interconnected as well. So it's not a case of one or the other. It's a case of we need all of our technologies to work together, which is why I've said in sort of previous forums, there is a moment in time now, particularly as we've got to the end of the rollout of the NBN, to really create a vision for the future of telecommunications for Australia over the next decade, because fundamentally it's the highways and it's the network that keeps us all connected and is enabling us to do everything that we're doing in terms of working and studying from home as well. So that's going to be crucial. And I think there is a moment in time now with the end of the rollout and the launch of 5G to really build an exciting vision for telecommunications for the future, which is technology agnostic, and make sure that we're all connected with the bandwidth that we need.
Yeah, that is the thing, isn't it? Making sure we're all connected. And I must admit, I'm not going to regard the NBN rollout as finished until I've got a fibre right into my house. So that's the gold standard for me, and I'm looking forward to that at some point. Now, I know you and I are both very aligned on the need for equity, to remove inequality where it appears. And as a founding member of the Male Champions of Change, you've been wearing your heart on your sleeve on this particular topic for a long time, and thank you very much for that. So anything that's about recruitment or human resource practices that creates a level playing field is always going to attract, I think, both of our interests. So when you talked about location agnostic recruitment and so forth, that really piqued my interest. And we've got a question from Amanda, who's focusing on the younger generation and new graduates. And I think there has been quite a bit of talk that COVID impacts can be, a bit of a way of increasing the inequality and creating generational disadvantage, because if you're already in the workforce, you can adapt to these new ways of working. But if you're not in the workforce and you haven't had those experiences, how are you going to even get that first opportunity? So Amanda's really interested in understanding more about how you think about this, and I'd be keen to hear more about that location agnostic recruitment and what Telstra's doing to create an equal playing field.
Yeah, no, well, look, we've long been committed to building inclusiveness and diversity into our organisation. I mean, fundamentally, Telstra's obviously a large company, and the nature of the business that we do, I don't think there's an Australian, even if they're not a direct customer of us, I don't think there's an Australian that isn't some way, shape, form or another supported by Telstra, because even if they're a customer of somebody else, we're probably supporting their network somewhere in the background. And of course, many Australians are shareholders as well. And so one of our primary thoughts about diversity is, as an organisation, we need to reflect who we serve. And that's why, first and foremost, is inclusion is really important, and it's important for the business as much as it is obviously to support equity and equality. And so we've done a number of things in that regard. We launched All Roles Flex back in 2013, which was this concept that people could work from home. Primarily, it was the responsibility of the manager to facilitate how that would happen, not the responsibility of the individual to prove that it could. And that's been very successful for us. And we're just launching, as you said, location agnostic recruitment. What that means at a practical level, and most of us have signed a contract at some point or received a contract at some point. Usually in there, it's got something in there that says what your place of work is, your primary place of work is. So going forward, from around about the middle of this year, we're just working through the implementation, that will be agnostic. It will not be a criteria as to where you need to be. And I think these are the sorts of things that can actually, further support diversity and inclusion. We've obviously got a number of other programs, such as our parental support programs, in terms of both being available, obviously, for fathers as well as for mothers, but also flexible in how they take that parental support. They don't necessarily need to take it all at the same time. So there's multiples of ways, Diane, I think that we can do this. And I think, given that we're going through this sort of seismic change at the moment, as I mentioned in my remarks, we've got to be careful that it's a moment that we don't go backwards on diversity and inclusion, but actually it's a real opportunity to try and make a giant leap forward. Because the other thing that you and I would know is that, candidly, there's a lot of good work that's been done, but the numbers do not show the level of change that we need to make. It will take a very, very long time to get true ended equity and true diversity and inclusion in our workforces if we continue at the same trajectory we were pre-COVID. So my view is, how do we use this as an opportunity to accelerate that?
Yeah. There's been some follow-on questions around this topic, Andy, particularly around if you're going to be less concerned about location, as you've talked about a number of times, what does that do to the blend of work-life balance, if you will, the split between work and leisure? I'm in the fortunate position in some ways of being a single woman who has a very large home, that I rattle around in, but it does mean that I can have my life and just live it and blend my work in whenever I want, but not everyone has that circumstance. So how are you thinking about that work-life balance, the blending of work and leisure, and how to get that right and guide your people towards that?
Yeah, no, look, I think it really goes to the role of leaders to make sure they are checking in and they understand the lifestyles of their teams and of the people that they're working with, to make sure that they are properly supported. Exactly to your point, I used the example in my remarks about, one of our team members was using the bedside table as their desk because his flatmate had sort of camped in at the kitchen bench. And so these are real life situations. So, we're thinking right now about other changes that we make to our office strategy, how we're consolidating some of our offices, how we're thinking about the regions, but also the type and nature of office premises that we make available as well. I mean, there's quite a lot of discussion and interest at the moment around hybrid workplaces, smaller satellite areas that you can make available for people that, might want to work from home or might want to work locally, but are not able to, as you say, because they don't have the benefit of the perhaps of a home that really supports that or facilitates that. The other piece is technology. Technology is huge in the sense, as I mentioned, not all virtual meetings are the same. And the thing that makes the difference is technology, as well as how you manage those meetings and make sure that you do engage people and everyone on the call or on the video conference. And so therefore arming your people with the right tools, also giving them skills to leverage those tools. I think, we've probably all become experts in Zoom and Microsoft Teams and VMR and whichever application you're using, we've learned we've become experts at it very quickly. But also, I know what's happening with those companies that support those applications is that they're innovating them very, very quickly as well. And so I think that it is the role of leaders to really be tapped in with their people. And I think the question came up sometime before, how do you do that? I mean, well, we regularly pulse our people in the sense that we're surveying them every month. Not everybody, but we try and do it in a way that we're getting a constant feedback from the teams without drowning people in surveys. And we adapt the questions regularly as well to make sure that we're really tapping into what the contemporary concerns are. So that's important. But as well as, I think, leaders checking in with your teams. For me and my direct team, we have a check-in 3 times a week. We have a sort of like a formal meeting on a Friday, but we check in on a Monday and on a Wednesday. And the first half of that meeting is just really, particularly on a Monday, is just to check in. What did people do over the weekend? How are people feeling? Any sort of issues of concerns, not so much about the work, but how we're working together as a team. So I just think, there's people out there are a lot more creative than I am, but I think the point is we need to do it.
Yeah, and Russell Yardley, who's a really, creative thinker in this space, was actually wanting to know what's your personal version of management by walking around now that you're in a COVID world. So you've given us some insight into that. Is there anything else you've got in Andy's management by walking around toolkit?
Well, I do a number of things. So I catch up one-on-one with people who are not my direct reports and do a check-in with those people just so that I'm connecting there. I'm also doing, in fact, I did one late last week, a check-in with a group of field techs. Those guys will get together for a huddle at 8 o'clock in the morning. And actually, even pre-COVID, it was a virtual huddle because these ones were based in the Northern Territory. So I had someone in Kununurra, Broome, Perth, and what is it? Not Epworth, can't remember. Town south of Broome, west coast of Australia. You'd know, Diane. But anyway, so I'll do that, catch up with my field techs just to check in with how they're going, learn a little bit about what customers are experiencing. I do regional trips. I always used to do one regional trip a month where I would go to places like Dubbo or Orange or Wagga, Bunbury, multiple regional towns, just to check in with local stakeholders, local customers, our teams, and we've replicated all of that virtually as well. So to me, you can connect virtually, and so there's nothing to stop me from doing all of the things I used to do, but just doing them virtually. And yes, would I like to do some of them face-to-face? Yes, of course I would, but I can't. So it's not a reason to stop doing them. And it's actually more important to really sort of hold myself to do them. The other thing as well that I've been thinking about quite a bit, and I'm planning a couple of trips coming up. I'm planning the Northern Territory in March and Queensland in May. And of course, I don't know whether there will be restrictions or not that may or may not allow me to do that, but I'm going to plan them anyway. And I'm going to be far more spontaneous about the decisions I make to be in the office or to travel, because there is not going to be, as I said before, there's not going to be a nice, neat glide path back to normal. We may be perfectly fine this week and we may have restrictions next week. So if I think there's a value in being able to go somewhere this week and I can do it, then I'm going to go. And if it's going to change next week, well, so be it. I'll deal with that next week. So I just think, and I think I made the point, it seems to be the paradox of our time that we need to focus our strategic decisions on the long term, but our work ways of working decisions in the present and in the moment.
It's giving a really big workout to leadership capability. And Joanne Fox is asking a question about that leadership capability, because it sounds to me like you're using all of the capabilities that you and your team had before to manage in this crisis period while keeping an eye on the long-term future. But she'd be interested in your reflection on what you're seeing in terms of different leadership and new leadership capabilities that might be needed, and how you're thinking about fostering those within the Telstra environment.
most sort of, I suppose, intuitive point that would come to my mind in that question is really building that muscle to show more vulnerability and to be more vulnerable, and to build a stronger connection with your people. And it's, in many ways, it's one of the things that COVID has done, is it's collapsed what I call the old professional barriers or shields of professionalism, such as, being in the office or actually having an office in the office, or wearing a suit or a tie, or titles, or all of those sorts of things. Ultimately, and as leaders, sometimes you underestimate them, but they do create barriers to being able to engage with your people and to make you approachable. And I think one of the most significant things that leaders, from my point of view, that I suppose the muscle I'm working on more is really trying to sort of bring as much of that down as possible to make myself as approachable as possible, and to be able to engage as empathetically and as intimately as possible with the teams that I'm working with, and not just with my team, but with all of the stakeholders that I might be dealing with, whether it's, and it does go for the same for whether it's politicians or regulators or people in the media or investors. That's the one defining thing about COVID, is everybody is in the same boat. Everybody is impacted to some degree. Everybody has got a story. And from a business point of view, the issue is not that you have to necessarily have the answer to everything, but if you can respond better competitively, then you're going to do better. And that's basically what our role in life is from a leading the business perspective.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good insight. We're actually coming towards the end of our time, but we still have time for a couple of other questions, and then I will reveal the poll results. So your commentary around all the calls answered in Australia is something that's, struck a number of people as an important and interesting comment. And as you know, that's something I was quite interested in when we were doing our pre-briefing. So James would be a bit interested in hearing more about that, what the experience was in making that transition from offshore to calls answered in Australia. How do you think that'll happen? Will it largely be in call centres? Will it be from people's homes, some sort of hybrid model? And what lessons did you learn that might help other Australian companies think about reshoring?
Yeah, no, sure. Well, look, a couple of things I would say. The first is that we do get people who are concerned and unhappy about the fact that we have offshore call centres. What I would say, though, is what's first and foremost is important is we have to provide our customers with the best possible service. Now, in the end, whether they're calling somebody onshore or offshore, to me, that's a slightly secondary point. The most important point is they shouldn't have to call us in the first place, and that's what we're really focused on fixing. And that's been at the heart of a lot of the investments that I've been talking about and a lot of the changes I've been talking about, particularly around simplification embedded in our whole strategy. And in fact, if I go back to 2016, as a company, we would receive about 50 million calls a year to our call centre. I think that this year that number is going to be closer to 15, and possibly below that. So we've dramatically reduced the volume of calls through eliminating just a lot of annoyances that people would have. That's enabled us to focus a lot of our people on providing a different type of service and better helping our customers actually get more out of the technology rather than ringing up to sort of report some sort of fault with it as well. Having said that, it does also give us the opportunity to move all of our call centre for our consumer and small business customers effectively onshore. And that is what we are going to be doing. And we will have completed that within the next 18 months. So that basically 100% of all of our inbound calls from our consumer and small business customers in Australia will be answered here in Australia. We already had, I think it's probably about 65% of calls already answered in Australia, because whilst we have offshore call centres, we've always had a very strong presence in Australia. And candidly, when we were having 50 million calls a year, Australia did not have the capacity resource-wise to enable us to support that. Because we've made these changes, it now does. And that's been a great benefit of all of the changes that we've made. And so, and to the question about working from home, currently 100% of our call centre operatives in Australia are able to work from home. 80% choose to, and we will continue to make that an option and a choice for them.
I've just got the results of our poll, and I think they're quite interesting, Andy, so I thought I might just quickly read them out to you and see what your take might be. So what we asked was, what's the most important enabler to driving workplace flexibility, employee engagement and productivity? And 44% of people said, please reimagine and redesign a modern workplace for me. Now, that's probably no surprise to you. 21% of people said, invest in me, education, training, all those sorts of things. 17% of people said, give me digital tools and technology. Only 4% of people said, reform industrial relations. And this was a question that I actually did get, and I think it might have been a follow-on from Amanda around, are the IR settings actually going to help you do all the things you need to do? Or maybe we'll take it away from you, Telstra, to we Australia. So maybe that could be your last comment for me, please.
Yeah, no, look, thanks very much. Well, what's interesting in that response was that I thought the technology and tools might come further up the list, which is a good thing, because it means that people feel as though they are getting great technology and are getting access to tools as well. So that's one observation I would have. I think on the IR front, if you think about what we're looking to do is to move to a world where we offer the most flexibility to our people to work where they want, when they want, and how they want. The industrial relations reform we need is to support our industrial legislation framework to enable that. We don't want people, if a family wants to work late in the day because it suits them, because they've got children that they're looking after during the day, we don't want there to be a disadvantage of doing that because it's not in the company's interest to facilitate and allow that because there's some type of penalty rate or otherwise. And so I think they're the areas. The other important area will be health and safety in the workplace. When people are working from home, that then becomes a new workplace. And so we need to be sensible and measured in terms of how we infer the implications of the obligations of the organisation to enable people to continue to facilitate people working from home, not make it so hard for organisations and so onerous that they can't, that it's not within their capacity to be able to do that. And so I think that's the key area. I think that industrial relations reform going forward should focus on is how do we make sure that we protect, obviously, people in the workplace, but how do we make sure that we recognise this new dynamic virtual environment, which is both where people work, but also when and how they want to work.
Thank you, Andy. That's an absolutely fantastic point to finish on, because I think that really does go to the very heart of protecting work for all Australians, being able to work in a frame that really suits you. You've been incredibly generous with your insights today. Thank you so much. And CEDA very much thanks Telstra for being such an active member in CEDA, a very important member, very always willing to be part of the conversation, which is great. Everyone will get a link to the recording of today's event, so you'll be able to go back to catch up on the things that you may not have been able to scribble down as you were listening to Andy speak. This is a real example of leadership in action, sharing personal insights, doing it in such an accessible way. And so it does make me want to tell you all about the CEDA Copeland Leadership Program. We're accepting applications for our leadership programs in New South Wales and Western Australia, and you can find out all about these and all CEDA programs at ceda.com.au. I'm looking forward to seeing many of you at our Economic and Political Overview, February 16 and 17. But again, thank you, Andy, thank you, Telstra, for your membership of CEDA, and I'll call today's event to a close.
Thanks, Diane.